So I'll be speaking on behalf of our team here in the front row, and we'd like to tell you about the city of Albany. And Albany, they recently developed their sustainability plan, and as you can see here on the screen, they cleverly titled it Albany 2030, Your City, Your Future. So they asked us to help with the next step, and the next step is helping them develop metrics and determine the targets that will go along with all the sustainability goals that they've outlined in the plan that we first looked at. What I'd like to do now is give you a little bit of background on not only the sustainability plan that Albany has, but also our research approach, next steps. But really, the bulk of our presentation is going to be around our findings and our recommendations. I have a temptation to move. I'm going to try to stay put here. Those who know me know I like to wander. So Albany, their plan is organized around 8 highly interdependent plan systems. And if you see on the screen on the right, you'll see them listed there with the icons. You'll see those icons again later. And for each plan system, that's broken down into multiple goals. You see it on the left side there, multiple strategies and multiple actions. So as our team tried to make sense of our plan of attack, we decided to focus on the goal level so that as we came up with metrics and targets, we'd be able to have the greatest impact on that top level, the plan systems. In our discussions when we first got started, we concluded that real sustainability includes a holistic mindset, interconnectedness between goals and actions, and triple bottom line metrics. And probably most of you are familiar with triple bottom line framework. That is combining the economic, the social, and the environmental measures. So we used that as our framework when we went through trying to identify metrics, and we looked for examples of metrics that fell in between 2 circles or more. And the ones that fell in between, we called them double bottom line, and more specifically, we call them social efficiency, social environmental, and social economic measures. In terms of our research methodology, that came out into 4 stages. So the first stage is we had numerous goals, and the first step was then to prioritize these goals, and we did so using a number of criteria that we came up with. The second stage then was to do research, and we did extensive research on Albany's that were and cities that were comparable to Albany. And we looked at their current practices, we looked at case studies, we looked at any information that would serve as benchmarks for us. And in addition, we also looked at material provided by the client as well as from our faculty advisor. Third step was then to identify metrics. And the metrics we chose were based on not only what other cities were doing, also how well they measured the goal achievement, whether it was double or triple bottom line. And then last but not least, which we discovered was quite important, is whether the client could even measure that, because they had limited capacity as to what they actually could track and measure. Like the other teams, we had challenges. I won't bore you with all of them, but I'll touch on 2 of them. One of the challenges, and I think I will talk about the second one, is the challenge of finding holistic metrics. And by that, again, we were talking about the triple bottom line. And we found that not in all cases was a triple bottom line metric feasible or appropriate. So in many cases, we brought it back down to the double bottom line metrics we just mentioned to you. Another challenge we faced is that many cities that did have sustainability plans were not yet at a point where they could quantifiably measure their success. We were surprised to see the large variance between cities who are still in the process of thinking through and developing their plan versus those who are a little bit further and started to implement, but few were far enough along to actually set and track and report on those quantitative metrics. So that may come with time. For each of the high priority goals, our team researched and recommended 6 different items, and you see them here on the list. And you'll notice that the top 3 all have to do with metrics. So that will show you the importance, not only to our client, but the level of effort we put into making sure that the metrics we identified were truly the best ones to help Albany achieve their goals. On the list here, the second most important were the targets. Because while we did do our research and look at the benchmarks and the data needed, that was really more to support the recommendations around the metrics and the targets. So this is our first example of the 23 goals that we worked on. This is an example of our work product. So the goal that Albany set for stormwater, and I can read it to you, but you also can see it there on the screen, is to use stormwater management best practices to reduce the impact on water quality and to mitigate the costs of engineered stormwater systems. Engineered stormwater systems is another word for gray infrastructure, in case you're wondering what that's all about. The metric we selected was an eco-efficiency metric, and by that I mean, if you look at the graph on the side there, it is both an environmental and an economic measure. Specifically, what we recommended to Albany is that they measure the amount of stormwater that is diverted into green infrastructure. With regard to target, what we're proposing is Albany capture the first inch of rainfall on 10% that falls on impervious surfaces, and do that either through detention or infiltration source controls, and to do that by the year 2030. In addition to that primary metric, we also provide alternate metrics. And in this case, for stormwater, we suggested one other metric that Albany could consider would be to measure the cost savings from reducing CSOs. And a CSO is a combined sewer overflow. It's like in Manhattan, if there's too much rainwater, they just release everything into the river. Not a good thing. Another measure that we offered for them to consider is to measure the cost mitigated per unit of water absorbed by impervious surfaces. This is a quick snapshot in our report. Obviously, we go into much more detail. We provide a rationale as to why we chose the other metric on the previous slide versus these, but this will give you a taste. The next challenge then was to set the target. And the way we went about this is we did a tremendous amount of research on different cities comparable to Albany when possible to see what they were doing. What were the practices, what were the case studies, what targets did they set? In the case of stormwater, we didn't have much success. There wasn't a lot of information. So we turned to larger cities. We turned to New York City, we turned to Philadelphia. And you'll see that what we're suggesting here for New York City is actually what we're suggesting for Albany. And in the case of Philadelphia, they've actually already introduced ordinances that require the developers to manage that first inch of stormwater on site. Our rationale ends up being we suggest the other metric, and these they may eventually want to include as additional metrics, not instead of. But at this point, they don't have that capacity. This is the eyesore many of you saw last time, and we have created a handout which we thought would be in your package today, but apparently it's not in your package today, but when you see the final package, you will be able to read this clearly. It's a 2-page handout. So because it's still an eyesore, I am going to walk you through a little bit what you're looking at, and hopefully you remember that when you read through it. So for example, if we look at employment, when you see the handout, or you can see it here, on the left, the goal that Albany set was to increase employment opportunities at all educational and skill levels, and to raise local income. After our diligent work, the metric we identified is we suggested Albany measure the percentage of households that earn a living wage. And again, that's a socioeconomic. You see the double bottom line in there? Thirdly, then, we looked at the target, and on the third column to the right, this is the target we're proposing. We suggest that 95% of Albany's households should earn a living wage by 2030. So that's how it is with all the goals you see on this page. Take another one, air quality. Left column is the goal that Albany set. Middle column is the metric we identified. Right column then is the target that we're proposing. So this is just a snapshot. For all of the 23 sustainable goals that we researched, we also did all of the work to identify the metrics, which is the middle column, as well as the targets, as well as the alternate metrics, as well as the rationale, as well as the benchmarks, as well as the data needed, as well. There's no way we could cover all of that. So we just wanted to give you a sample here of what our, I think it's 89-page document now includes. So this is the summary page. So before I close, I did want to summarize some of the findings, some of the observations our team had. And again, I won't go through all of them, but one of the first ones we had is that currently few cities are using the triple bottom line framework or are measuring their success using quantitative metrics. And we think that over time, as we talked about a little bit earlier, that might change. But if you read some of the others, let me point out the third one. We found that cities that use quantifiable metrics are more likely to be successful in tracking and achieving their goals. So obviously this is a trend based on the little research we've done so far that we would encourage. So finally, next steps. So our next step as a team will be presenting to Albany's planning department, our client, and we'll do that on the 16th of December. And we will recommend then to our client to go back to Albany and with their peers and the team, refine some of those targets, tweak them as needed. I mean, they're our best guess, but I think Albany ultimately would be in the best position to know whether it's a low end or high end of a range. We also recommend that they present then these metrics and targets to their stakeholders. And that can range anywhere from different departments in the city government to the community. They really have involved the community quite a bit in development, and I'm sure the community wants to hear what's next. Which leads me to the final point, is we suggest that they integrate the measures and the metrics to go along with the goals that they currently have, so they have a far more actionable plan that they can put forward, and perhaps then, indeed, be more sustainable in 2030. Thank you.